They said moving to a new city would be a fresh start. But no one warned me that longing learns the way too, moving with you in silence, packed among the things you swear you left behind. The day I closed the door of the apartment I'd lived in for nearly 4 years, there was no dramatic scene, no pleading, no tears on his face, just a cold echo between the walls, a forgotten note on the table, and the kind of goodbye that's not spoken but felt in the absence of any attempt to stop me. I left out of pride, yes, but also out of self-preservation. I was tired of being half, of waiting for messages that never came, of making excuses for absences that hurt, of romanticizing a man who always seemed too busy to love me fully. And yet, when the car crossed the state line and the new city's welcome sign appeared, it felt like my chest had left a piece of itself caught in the rearview mirror. In the days that followed, I kept myself busy as best I could. New job, temporary address, a supermarket with unfamiliar brands. I smiled at neighbors who didn't know my story, responded kindly to strangers who called me by the name on my badge, and every night was filled with movies I didn't really watch. But what hurt most wasn't his absence. It was that he didn't come after me. No call, no "where are you?" No attempt to prove I was more than a memory forgotten in the back of an old conversation. And maybe that's why the emptiness here, even with new streets, new neighborhoods, and even a new haircut, still silently carries his name, because I came to save myself. But part of me still hoped, with a stubborn, hidden hope, that he'd be capable of crossing everything, just to tell me he didn't accept the end. It was strange to realize how the body adapts before the soul. In no time, I knew where to find the bakery with the best whole grain bread, which streets had less traffic at the end of the day, and which cafes were quiet enough to let me sit with an open book, pretending to read. The city welcomed me with the polite kindness of someone who asked no questions, and maybe that's why it was so easy to hide. I walked with steady steps and a calm face, like someone exactly where they chose to be. But inside, there were cracks I tried to ignore. Deep down, every new beginning is a kind of mourning. You grieve what you chose to leave, what you were forced to lose, what there wasn't time to fix. And in my case, I grieved for all of it at once, but in silence. I didn't let anyone see, not even the mirror. In the mornings, I looked at myself with eyes rehearsing serenity, applied lipstick with hands that barely trembled, and told myself, like a prayer, "You're okay. You did the right thing." Because loving someone who didn't know how to choose you is the kind of pain you don't shout, you swallow. And I was swallowing so much I no longer knew the taste of lightness. At work, I was efficient, kind, and utterly invisible in my emotions. I'd learned over time and with him not to expect too much from people, to be everyone's safe harbor, but never need rescuing myself. And that's exactly what I did. I kept others at ease while feeling trapped in an inner space no one visited. At night, when the city lights flickered in the buildings around my window, I let myself remember. The way he said my name, like it was both a prayer and a challenge. The way he laughed when I stood my ground, as if he liked seeing me strong. I also remembered his silences. Those hurt the most. The time it took him to reply to messages, the last-minute cancellations, the disappearances that came without explanation. But the worst wasn't his absence. It was that, despite it all, my heart still carried his name like a password to something that never fully became real. I was in the right city with the right decision, but my soul was stitched with memories that wouldn't let me breathe fully, and there was within me a deep exhaustion, not of love but of waiting. Waiting for a gesture, a change, an action that showed I was truly indispensable to him. But that gesture never came. The phone never rang, the messages never arrived. He moved on, or pretended to very well. And he, despite everything, was still there, Loving in silence, loving alone, and it's cruel to admit that to yourself. That even after leaving, part of me was still sitting on the couch of our last conversation, looking at him with tearful eyes and a heart hoping with all it had left that he'd say, "Don't go." But he didn't. And now, days, weeks later, I was the woman starting over, but never fully able to close the door I left behind. I started noticing something had changed when, for some reason I couldn't explain, my routine stopped feeling entirely mine. It wasn't anything concrete. No messages, no visible signs, no touch that made me shiver. Just a feeling, like when the air shifts before a storm, even though the sky is clear. Amid my forced attempt at rebuilding, I began to sense too many eyes following me. Once I thought I saw a familiar figure across the street, but I blamed it on exhaustion. Another time, I was sure I heard someone call my name softly in a cafe, but when I turned, no one was there. It wasn't fear, it was a premonition. And what my body sensed, my mind still refused to name. Maybe it was just longing setting traps. Maybe it was just the desire for him to come looking for me, screaming so loudly inside that I started seeing his shadow everywhere he wasn't. But it was more than that. It was as if something was approaching, with measured steps and restrained intent, as if time had slowed on purpose, giving me a chance to recognize what was coming, yet not prepare for it. One Saturday morning, I got a call from an unknown number. I didn't answer. On Sunday, a flower was left at my building's front desk, a peony, just like the ones he said reminded him of the scent of my neck. The note was anonymous, and that's when my body froze. Not out of fear, but recognition. I knew that gesture, that quiet stubbornness, that disguised way of approaching. It was him. I knew, before seeing, before hearing, before confirming. That night, I didn't sleep. I sat on the living room floor, the flower in my lap and my heart clenched between my fingers, as if trying to figure out what to do with everything I'd spent months trying to bury. The love that hadn't left, the hurt that still pulsed, the absurd desire to hear his voice say anything, even that he came too late. Because what hurt me was never his absence. It was his silence as I left. And now, with a simple, almost childish gesture, he made my entire world tremble. I wanted to hate him. I wanted to scream. I wanted to remember everything that made me leave. But all I could feel, looking at that timid flower, was the old knot in my throat that always came when I was about to soften. And I realized with painful relief, he was here. And what I swore I'd closed off was now knocking at my door with the audacity of someone who never truly left. I saw him before I even knew it was him. And that's how I understood that the body recognizes before the mind. The way my breaths caught without reason, the way time seemed to slow between his steps, the way my heart acted as if it had seen a ghost. It didn't want to scare. All of me already knew. We were on the sidewalk of one of the places I'd started, frequenting on Saturdays, a simple, almost hidden street market. I was carrying a bag with apples and flowers, thinking it would be just another ordinary day of silence and routine. But when I looked ahead, I saw that face. Not like the last time I saw him. He was more worn, maybe tired, with less arrogance in his chest and more hesitation in his eyes. For a moment I thought it was a hallucination. But when he took a hesitant step and stopped, looking at me as if asking permission to exist, I knew. It was real. He was there. I didn't say anything. Neither did he. We just stood there, facing each other with the city's chaos moving around us, as if our story wasn't silently collapsing right there. There was a plea in his eyes, but also a clear fear that I'd turn away. And I almost did. Out of instinct, out of self-preservation, out of everything I had to do to not fall apart after he let me go. But I didn't, because something inside me, maybe the same part that chose to love so long ago, hadn't been buried yet. It was strange to see him again, like time had made copies of him inside me, but none as real as the man before my eyes now. The silence between us wasn't empty. It was a minefield, and every second that passed without either of us speaking was like walking through everything left unsaid. When he finally spoke, his voice came out low, almost as if he didn't want to disrupt the moment, as if he were speaking more to himself than to me. "You cut your hair." That's all he managed to say. And for some inexplicable reason, that's what undid me. Because I wanted him to say he missed me, that he couldn't move on, that I was still the name he whispered in the dark when he didn't know what to believe anymore. But he just said, "You cut your hair," as if my new haircut was the visible marker of the woman I'd had to become to survive his absence. I took a deep breath. I looked at him with all the pain I'd learned to disguise and said, "And you came too late." He lowered his gaze, not out of shame, but as if he knew he deserved to hear it. We stood there for a few more seconds. There was no reunion, no embrace, just two people standing in the middle of a strange city, trying to figure out if what still existed between them was longing or just an echo. And before walking away, he said, "I didn't come to ask for anything. I just needed to see you." And that was it. He left slowly, and I stayed there, frozen, with the apples slipping from the bag and a tear that refused to fall. Because love sometimes doesn't come back asking for forgiveness. It comes back first just to see if it's still recognized. He didn't disappear after that day, and maybe that was the scariest part, because part of me expected, or maybe even wanted, that encounter to be just a hiccup of fate, a cruel and brief coincidence, the kind that shakes us only to remind us the past still breathes. But he stayed, quietly, silently, with careful steps, like someone who knows the ground they're treading is still too fragile to bear weight. In the days that followed, I started seeing him in the same places I frequented, not by chance, I knew, but not by intrusion either. He made himself present without invading. And that was the hardest part. He didn't force anything. He just showed up. And the fact that I realized this stirred me more than any declaration would have scared me. During one of those afternoons of encounters, disguised as chance, he approached with more resolve. He offered me a coffee. I accepted. Not because I wanted to forgive him, but because it was too late to pretend my heart didn't react. We sat in silence for long minutes, like two people who know exactly what they'd like to say, but carry too much fear of what the truth might unleash. When he finally spoke, he didn't use excuses. He didn't try to fix what was broken. He just said he'd thought of me every day since he watched me leave, that he'd watched time pass with the feeling he'd let something irreplaceable slip away. And now, sitting across from me, he felt that maybe he could, if not fix it, at least care for it. I wanted to laugh. I wanted to scream. I wanted to ask why he had to lose me to remember I was important. But all I did was look at him with eyes full of contained pain and say, "You weren't there when I needed you, and I needed you so much." He nodded. And that gesture, more than any apology, undid me. That was the day he started winning me back, not with pretty words, but with consistency. He didn't try to impress me. He just showed up. At the end of the workday, with 2 coffees and an "I thought you might want company." On weekends, he sent simple messages, asking if I was okay. He spoke calmly, looked at me carefully, and the most curious thing, he listened as if he'd never done it before. It was as if, for the first time, he was truly seeing me. Not as the woman he desired when it was convenient, but as the whole woman with all the pain, silences, and courage that came after leaving. And it was that new gaze, so sincere, so unhurried, that began to crack the wall I'd spent months building. But it wasn't easy, because with his presence came the ghosts. The nights I cried alone, the times I was ignored, the plans he left hanging as if my life could be put on hold. I carried all of that as a shield, and he knew. He never tried to approach too quickly. He just stayed. And that staying hit me the hardest, because he'd never known how to stay before. And now, there, day after day, he didn't say he loved me. He said he was there, and that he wasn't leaving this time. And it was in that new space, between the hurt and the possibility, that I began, still scared, to admit to myself. Maybe there was still a part of me that wanted to believe again. Trust, once broken, never returns the same. It comes back like glued glass, beautiful from a distance, but with marks that shine under the right light. And I knew that. I knew it from the first coffee, the first reunion, the first look from him that seemed to say, "Let me try." I was no longer the woman who dreamed of promises. I now weighed actions, distrusted peace, and slept with one eye open, even when the other insisted on dreaming. But still, I wanted to believe. For me. Because I was tired of living for protection. And he was doing everything right. And that was the problem. He was being present, patient, kind, respectful. And that stirred me more than I wanted to admit. Because deep down, I knew it was real. But I still didn't know if it was safe. Then life, as it does with those starting to rebuild, decided to test what was being reconstructed. One night, as we ate together at my place for the first time since he found me, my phone buzzed with a notification that froze me. A message from an old friend. Short, direct, and with the careless cruelty of someone who doesn't understand. The moment. Heard he's back. Be careful, Noelle. He said he loved you and still, you know what he did. It was like someone poured ice into the room. Not because I didn't remember, but because I was trying not to remember all the time. I read that message in front of him. I didn't hide it. And maybe that was the biggest sign that there was still a part of me willing to face everything. I didn't want to protect anyone from the truth. He noticed. He stayed silent, looked at me with eyes more tired than guilty, and then said, with a trembling voice, "You have every right to remember. I just want the right to show I've changed." That's when I understood what hurt me most. It wasn't what he did. It was that he left me alone with the pain, as if it was only my problem. And in that moment, even wanting to, even trying, even with everything we'd shared in the past weeks, I pulled back. I asked him to leave, and he did, without arguing, without insisting. He just left. But before going, he looked at me one last time and said, "I didn't come to repeat anything. I came because despite all the mistakes, you're still the place I want to stay." I closed the door, and I fell apart. I stayed up all night. I didn't cry, but I couldn't think of anything else. The message, his visit, the silences, the past, everything swirled inside me as if my soul was being pulled in every direction at once. Loving is easy. Trusting is what breaks us. And there, sitting on the living room floor, surrounded by memories, I realized the biggest dilemma wasn't about him. It was about me. I had to choose between staying protected or letting myself live again, even with the risk of breaking. And in that long, answerless dawn, only one thing became clear. Either I'd take a step toward what could be, or I'd spend the rest of my life trapped in what wasn't. The next morning came slowly, as if it knew I wasn't ready to face anything yet. The sun filtered through the window with gentleness, and even the house's silence felt less harsh than the nights before. I got up slowly, as if not wanting to make noise in my own heart. I made coffee on autopilot and sat on the balcony, the mug between my hands, trying to understand why. Despite everything, my chest still ached in a way that wasn't just pain. It was longing, but not for him. It was longing for myself, for the woman I was when I loved without fear. And there, with the bitter taste of coffee still in my mouth, I began to accept that maybe I still wanted to try. Not for him, but for me. Because I was tired of living like someone who survives. Tired of keeping everyone at a distance for fear of being hurt. Tired of running from things that maybe now had changed. I spent the whole day rehearsing conversations that might never happen. Sentences that started with, "I still feel," and ended with, "But I need to know if you'll stay." I walked to the park, read 3 pages of a book without absorbing a single word, and came home with my head fuller than when I left. And by late afternoon, as the light softened and the sky took on that orange hue that always reminded me of new beginnings, I made a decision. Not to run back to him, but to let him come closer, with truth, with history, with everything that still hurts. I decided to open a crack, because maybe it wasn't about rekindling what we were. Maybe it was about discovering what we could be now, with everything we've learned, lost, and endured. And for the first time since I moved, I put on something light, tied my hair without much care, and picked up my phone. I sent a short message. "If you still want to talk, I'll be at the usual cafe, 5 p.m. I didn't wait for a reply. I didn't need to. That in itself was already an answer to myself. I was ready to listen. And if he showed up, maybe he was ready to talk, not as someone who wants to fix everything at once, but as someone who accepts rebuilding slowly. And if he didn't, I'd still have the peace of knowing I took the hardest step, opening myself to something new, even with a heart full of memories. Because maturity doesn't teach you to forget pain. It teaches you to feel without running. He arrived at 5:02 p.m. I saw him in the window's reflection before I saw him for real. He walked slowly like someone who respects another's time. And maybe that's why I didn't stand up. I let him approach at his own pace. When he sat down, there was no hug, no smile. Just a brief nod and the silence of someone carrying more weight in their words than on their shoulders. The cafe around us carried on with its soft music, clinking cups, and ordinary late afternoon sounds. But between us, the world seemed to shrink. Everything was a pause. Everything was memory. He started speaking softly, said he got the message, that he almost didn't come, that he was afraid of making everything collapse again. And I, with the mug between my hands, answered honestly, if it was going to collapse, it's because it was still fragile. And we stayed like that for a few seconds. The words came raw, without embellishment, without shortcuts. He then said what I'd been expecting, not because I wanted to hear it, but because I needed to. He talked about what he felt when he saw me leave, about the pride that silenced him, the fear of admitting he didn't know how to love right, and the cowardice of letting me go thinking the fault was mine, when really it was his too. He said he only understood it all months later, when he realized that the things we love and don't care for leave too. I listened, with a tight heart, cold hands and eyes fixed on the wooden table. I wanted to ask why he didn't fight for me. I wanted to understand what stopped him from following me sooner. But at the same time, I already knew. And deep down, maybe the most important thing wasn't what he did anymore, but what he was now. He spoke of longing, but not romantically. He spoke of the absence I left in simple gestures, in the way I said his name, in the silence he could only bear when it was with me. And then he stopped, as if waiting for a verdict, and I didn't give a yes. I didn't give a no. I just said the truth. You came back, but I'm still coming back to myself. And he understood. His eyes didn't plead, didn't retreat. They just stayed there, steady, as if saying, I can wait. And that's when I realized something in me was no longer afraid. Because loving after disappointment isn't about blind trust. It's about letting the other see your scars and stay anyway. And he was staying, not in a rush, but with presence. And maybe, just maybe, that was already the right beginning. That night, after the coffee, I walked home alone. He didn't offer to come with me, and I wouldn't have let him, even if he wanted to. The conversation between us had been like a mirror too clean. It showed everything, the cracks, the voids, the fears, and above all, the courage of two people who lost each other and now met again without guarantees. When I got home, I took off my shoes slowly, left my bag on the floor, and looked at my own living room like someone trying to find their place in their own story. Everything there was still mine, but somehow it wasn't only mine anymore, because a part of me was already making room again. The days that followed were quieter than ever, but it was a different silence, not one of defense, but of digestion. I saw him a few more times. He didn't force meetings. He just sent simple messages. I'm here. And sometimes that was all I needed to read. Because that's how I understood that what pushed me away from him back then wasn't a lack of love. It was a lack of care. And now, he cared. For me, for time, for space, for silence. He was present, not as someone who demands, but as someone who learned. The decision, when it came, wasn't with euphoria, it was with peace. On an ordinary afternoon, while arranging flowers in a vase, I caught myself smiling. And it wasn't that smile of instant infatuation. It was the smile of someone who knew what they wanted, knew what they wouldn't tolerate anymore, knew what they could build, not on what was, but from what was now. I picked up my phone and sent him a message with just an address, my address, and I wrote, "If you still want, come, but come slowly, because this time it's meant to." Minutes later, he replied, not with promises or rehearsed lines, just, "I'm already on my way, and I'll come as you want." And that was enough, because the woman who once left had to go away to find the strength that now let her choose. Not out of need, not out of longing, but out of maturity, out of wanting with clarity. And that night, when I heard the doorbell and opened the door, I didn't find a hero or a cinematic apology. I found a man. With simple flowers, sincere eyes, and a small smile. The kind that doesn't promise worlds, but says, "I came to stay." And I let him in. Today, when I look out the living room window and see the morning light touching the edges of the furniture with that almost shy gentleness, I understand that the life I have now isn't the one I dreamed of back then. It's better, not because everything worked out, but because I learned to let go of what didn't do me good, including old versions of myself. Loving after being hurt is an exercise in reconstruction. But what few people say is that this reconstruction doesn't start with the other. It starts within, with every small choice, every firm no, every respected silence. He's here, yes. Sometimes on the couch, laughing with his eyes closed. Sometimes across the kitchen, making strong coffee the way he learned I like. But above all, he's here as I asked, slowly, wholly present. We don't try to erase the past. We embrace it. We know exactly where it hurt. And maybe that's why now we care so much for what we have. We don't need to prove anything. We don't need to show anything. We just live, day by day, like two people who know that love isn't made of certainty. It's made of choice. The city where I started over no longer feels strange. The streets know my steps. The people smile when they see me. And me? I recognize myself in the mirror, with all the marks, the falls, and the victories that are now part of who I am. Time, when looked at with care, is a generous ally. It doesn't erase. but it teaches. If someone asked me what changed, I'd say, I changed, not to fit into someone's love, but to live mine with dignity, with truth, and with that serenity that only comes after the storm. Love conquered, yes, not because it came back, but because I chose to open the door. And this time, I only let in what has the courage to stay.